David woke to the soft light of early morning filtering through the curtains of his modest home. The room smelled faintly of coffee and the clean scent of the hardwood floor he had polished the night before. The house was quiet, save for the gentle snoring of Rex, his loyal black Labrador, curled up at the foot of the bed. David sat up slowly, stretching, careful not to wake the dog. The small routine of greeting the day brought him comfort, a kind of grounding he had cultivated after years of living a life that demanded precision and vigilance. For most people in the neighborhood, David seemed ordinary. He kept to himself, walked his dog every morning, and occasionally waved to neighbors who were out watering their gardens or jogging along the sidewalks. Children waved back timidly at first, but quickly learned that David was gentle, his presence calm. No one would ever guess that behind the quiet exterior lay one of the most skilled and disciplined soldiers to have ever served in Delta Force. He had spent years operating in some of the most dangerous and secretive theaters of the world, surviving situations that most could not even imagine. Yet here, in this small town, he was simply a man who valued peace and the familiar comfort of routine. David swung his legs over the edge of the bed and rubbed his hands together, feeling the calluses that told stories of hard work and combat training long ago. He reached down and patted Rex on the head. "Morning, boy," he said softly. Rex opened one eye and gave a small wag of his tail before laying his head back down. David smiled faintly and began preparing for their morning walk. He dressed in comfortable, practical clothing, choosing a simple jacket, a pair of jeans, and sturdy shoes. Each choice, while seemingly ordinary, reflected years of habit, comfort, function, and a readiness for anything. In his line of work, preparation had been everything. Today, though, it was simply about walking through the neighborhood and enjoying the calm of a cool morning. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the subtle sense of dew-covered grass. Freshly baked bread from the corner bakery, in the faint smoke of a neighbor's fire pit. Birds chirped in the trees, oblivious to the events of human life below. David clipped Rex's leash to his collar, and together they stepped onto the quiet street. The dog sniffed the ground with interest, tail wagging in slow, thoughtful movements. While David observed the familiar patterns of the neighborhood, the neighbors were beginning their day, mail being collected, newspapers tossed onto porches, and cars backing out of driveways as they walked. David exchanged nods and small greetings with a few early risers. There was Mrs. Henderson tending to her rose bushes, the teenager across the street jogging while listening to music, and Mr. Lewis washing his car in the driveway. Each interaction was brief but meaningful, a thread in the quiet fabric of daily life. David liked these moments, the subtle connection with people, even if he rarely spoke at length. In his past life, trust had been earned through action, not words. Here the gestures were small, simple, but no less genuine. Rex, sensing the morning's calm, moved confidently alongside David. The dog had been his companion for years, a constant presence in a life that once had been fraught with danger and secrecy. David's attachment to Rex was deep. The dog had been a source of solace, companionship, and an anchor to a life far removed from the chaos of military operations. He spoke to the dog quietly as they walked, sharing thoughts that no one else heard. "We'll have a quiet day, just us, right?" Their routine took them past the small coffee shop on the corner. David had grown fond of this place for its simplicity. He liked the barista, a young woman with a warm smile and the smell of freshly ground coffee beans. He paused, giving Rex a chance to sniff around, then stepped inside to place a quick order. "Black coffee, please," he said, his voice calm, steady, and unhurried. The barista handed him the cup with a small nod, and he smiled politely before exiting to continue his walk. As he moved down the street, David could sense subtle changes in the neighborhood. The usual quiet was punctuated by the occasional siren in the distance, a reminder that the world outside the small, controlled rhythm of his morning existed in chaos at times. Police cars passed hurriedly, officers inside alert and tense. It was ordinary, yet it reminded him of a life he had left behind, vigilant, prepared. Always aware of danger, he made a mental note of the small details, the way a delivery truck driver parked, how a neighbor's cat darted across the sidewalk, even the changing angle of sunlight on the pavement. These observations were second nature to him. Honed over years of operations where noticing the smallest detail could mean the difference between success and failure. But today it was simply about observing life, quietly and without expectation. Reaching the end of the block, David turned to guide Rex back toward home. He noticed subtle tension in the air he hadn't anticipated. A police car parked across the street. Officers standing outside, scanning the neighborhood with purposeful attention. David didn't panic. He observed calmly, recognizing that there may be a misunderstanding or an overreaction. He had learned long ago that the first step in any tense situation was to remain composed, to assess the environment, and to act with precision. Rex, sensing something unfamiliar, tensed beside him. Ears perked and tail lowered slightly. The dog growled softly, a protective warning rather than an act of aggression. David put a hand on Rex's collar, speaking in a quiet voice. "It's okay, boy. Just stay calm." His voice was soothing but firm, reflecting years of commanding teams under pressure. He knew that the next few moments would require careful action. The officers approached without greeting, their movements brisk and deliberate. "Stay where you are," one shouted, voice sharp and commanding. David raised his hands slowly, maintaining a calm stance. He took a step forward, carefully speaking to them. "Good morning, officers. Everything is fine. This is just my dog and me on our walk." But the situation escalated quickly. The officers, already on edge from prior calls, misinterpreted Rex's protective stance as a threat. Their training and heightened alertness overrode careful assessment. David's heart rate remained steady. He knew he had to act with absolute control to prevent disaster. "Rex down," he commanded softly. The dog complied, though the officer's response was immediate and disproportionate. Shots rang out. The world seemed to slow in David's mind, but he did not move recklessly. Rex lay still, his life cut tragically short. David felt the immediate surge of grief, anger, and disbelief, but he restrained himself. His military training told him that impulsive reaction could lead to further chaos, and he adhered to that discipline even in the face of personal loss. Neighbors had begun to gather, some horrified, some paralyzed by confusion. David remained composed outwardly, though inside he was a storm of emotion. He knelt beside Rex, gently touching the dog's head, whispering apologies and words of comfort. His mind, trained for high-pressure scenarios, began to assess the situation, officers' positions, possible witnesses, and the need for accurate documentation. He would not allow this tragedy to go unexamined. Not out of revenge, but out of principle. David understood consequences, and he knew that what happened here was the result of misunderstanding and poor judgment. He began mentally cataloging every detail: the time of day, the sequence of events, officers' movements, neighbors' reactions, and his own responses. Each piece was critical, each a part of a larger picture he would need to address carefully. The morning light continued to filter through the trees and onto the street, a stark contrast to the tension and grief surrounding the incident. David stood slowly, keeping his composure, and observed the faces around him. Some neighbors offered sympathetic looks, others remained silent, unsure how to intervene. He understood their hesitation. Few could comprehend the depths of his experience, the control required to remain calm in the face of intense stress. Though grief was present, so was resolve. David had faced life-or-death situations countless times, yet he knew that panic or rash action now would only worsen the outcome. He straightened his back, looked at the officers, and began speaking in measured, deliberate tones. This must be documented. Everyone involved should provide their account. "We will address this calmly and correctly." The officers, realizing that the man before them was composed and not acting recklessly, hesitated. There was something in his posture, his voice, and his eyes that commanded respect, even fear. David's reputation, unknown to them at this moment, was rooted in decades of skill, discipline, and control. As the neighborhood absorbed the aftermath of the morning's tragedy, David began to plan. He would record every detail, reach out to witnesses, and ensure that the incident was investigated thoroughly. His grief for Rex would not cloud his judgment. The quiet, disciplined man who walked through life peacefully now stood at the threshold of ensuring accountability. Guided by principles forged in the most extreme circumstances imaginable, this was the beginning of a turning point. The calm before the storm was over, and while David's demeanor remained composed, the events of the morning had set in motion a sequence that would reveal both human error and the extraordinary depth of the man who had once been a force few could rival. David returned to his home with a heavy heart, the echoes of the morning still vivid in his mind. The street had grown quiet again, but the sense of unease lingered. Inside, the house felt emptier, without the familiar presence of Rex padding silently at his feet. David moved through the rooms methodically, his military training surfacing even in mundane tasks. Every action was deliberate, checking locks, ensuring windows were secure, and scanning the property with a practiced eye. There was a discipline and routine, a way to channel grief into focus. David relied on it now. He sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone lukewarm. His mind replayed the events repeatedly, analyzing every moment. How had it escalated so quickly? Could he have done something differently? Yet he knew instinctively that the officers had acted on fear, not malice. They had seen Rex as a threat, and their reaction had been immediate and fatal. There was no logic in blame, only the responsibility to respond wisely and effectively. David picked up his notebook, a worn leather-bound journal he used for careful observations. He began recording details: the time the sirens arrived, the number of officers, their positions, the commands they issued, and Rex's movements. Every nuance mattered. Even small details, seemingly insignificant to others, could reveal patterns and help prevent future tragedy. His handwriting was neat, precise, each line a reflection of his focus. Hours passed. David continued cataloging what had happened. The news had begun to circulate on social media, neighbors sharing their shock and grief. Some expressed sympathy. Others posted speculation. The story quickly drew attention beyond the block, but David remained detached from the growing buzz. He did not post online or speak to reporters. His mission was clarity and accuracy, not publicity. Late in the afternoon, a familiar voice called on the phone. It was a retired colleague from his Delta Force days, someone who knew the depth of his skills and the life he had once led. "I heard about Rex," the voice said softly. "Are you okay?" David paused before responding. "I'll be all right. It's just unfair, and I need to ensure this is addressed properly." The colleague was silent for a moment, then spoke carefully. "You know what to do. You always have. And don't forget, the truth will surface when you handle it the way only you can." The conversation, brief as it was, reminded David of who he had been and what he could do. He hung up, a renewed sense of purpose settling over him. The loss of Rex was profound, but it also clarified his focus. He would act with the precision and patience that had carried him through far greater dangers. Over the next few days, David gathered witnesses and documented their accounts. Mrs. Henderson, who had seen the officers approach, provided a detailed recollection. Mr. Lewis had recorded video from his front porch camera, capturing critical moments. Even casual passersby who had stopped to help added pieces to the puzzle. David reviewed every statement meticulously, cross-referencing timelines, movements, and statements. His analytical mind turned grief into strategy each evening. He sat alone on the porch where Rex had often rested, reflecting on the dog's loyalty and the quiet life they had shared. Memories of walks through the neighborhood, the playful nudges during breakfast, the comforting presence during late nights returned vividly. These reflections fueled his resolve, reminding him of the importance of calm, measured action even when emotions were overwhelming. Meanwhile, the police department began its internal review. Officers involved were interviewed separately, each recounting their perspective. Miscommunication, fear, and heightened stress became evident as recurring themes. David remained outside the formal process for the time being. observing silently, knowing that patience would yield a clearer picture. He did not demand immediate answers. He allowed the process to unfold, prepared to act decisively once all information was collected. One afternoon, as David reviewed video evidence, a thought struck him. The officers had made assumptions, reacting to appearances rather than assessing actual risk. It was a lesson in human behavior, one he had often analyzed in past operations. Fear often overshadowed reason, and bias, however subtle, could shape outcomes in critical moments. He noted this in his journal, understanding that his next steps must address both accountability and awareness. Days passed, and the tension in the neighborhood remained. Conversations among neighbors shifted from sympathy for Rex to cautious discussions about authority and trust. David listened, sometimes offering gentle words, sometimes simply nodding. His presence alone, composed and steady, became a subtle reminder of resilience and control. People began to see that the man who appeared ordinary was far more than he seemed, though few could grasp the full scope of his life experience. Then came the meeting with police leadership. David arrived quietly, carrying his carefully prepared notes and evidence. The room was tense, officers seated stiffly, some avoiding eye contact, others fidgeting under the weight of expectation. David's calm presence immediately commanded attention. He did not raise his voice or make demands. Instead, he spoke with measured authority, presenting facts chronologically, highlighting inconsistencies, and pointing out procedural errors. As he explained the timeline and provided evidence, the room's dynamic shifted. Whispers began among officers. The same man who had appeared grief-stricken and composed now revealed a mind capable of thorough, precise analysis, a presence that left little room for evasion or falsehood. Leadership was visibly unsettled, realizing that the person before them was no ordinary citizen. David addressed each point with patience. This was a preventable tragedy, he said. The officers acted on fear and assumptions rather than clear assessment. Procedures were not followed and communication broke down. My goal here is accountability and understanding, not vengeance. He presented video evidence and witness accounts, carefully explaining sequences and highlighting critical moments. His calm and reasoned approach contrasted sharply with the chaos of the morning incident, demonstrating that control, clarity, and preparation could influence outcomes far more than force or intimidation. Throughout the meeting, David maintained composure, observing reactions subtly. Some officers avoided direct eye contact, a mix of embarrassment and apprehension apparent. Others whispered quietly, acknowledging the skill and authority behind his words. Even leadership, initially defensive, began to recognize the importance of his insights. The room transformed from tension to a focus on fact and responsibility. After the meeting, David stepped outside, letting the afternoon sun warm his face. The air felt lighter, the weight of confrontation eased by a structured, calm approach. The officers involved were left to process both the gravity of the incident and the realization of who they had encountered. Their training, habits, and assumptions had collided with a disciplined, highly capable individual who chose reason over reaction. News of the incident and David's involvement began spreading beyond the immediate community. Media curiosity grew. Social media discussions highlighted accountability and responsible policing, and local leaders began reviewing procedures. David remained private, avoiding interviews, preferring that the facts and documentation speak for themselves. His reputation, forged over decades in extreme conditions, became a silent but undeniable force in shaping outcomes. Evenings continued to be reflective. David returned to his porch, sitting quietly where Rex would have lain. He spoke softly to the empty space, recounting memories and lessons learned. He remembered the trust, loyalty, and companionship Rex had offered, the comfort of small routines, and the grounding power of a steady presence. These reflections guided his actions and reinforced his resolve to maintain discipline and calm. Neighbors began to notice subtle changes. Where once David had been reserved, now he was quietly authoritative, his measured actions inspiring trust. Some asked questions, seeking advice on conflict resolution, observation, and calm decision-making. David responded gently, understanding that influence often came through example rather than instruction. He modeled patience, composure, and strategic thinking, revealing lessons to those willing to observe. Weeks passed, and the officers involved faced internal review, retraining, and accountability measures. Policies were revisited, procedures clarified, and awareness of human behavior in high-stress situations became a focus. David had not acted out of anger, but had ensured that lessons were learned, responsibilities acknowledged, and systems improved to prevent future tragedies. Through it all, David continued his quiet life, walking the neighborhood, visiting the coffee shop, and observing the rhythm of daily life. He reflected on the fragility of life, the dangers of misjudgment, and the power of calm, strategic action. Even in grief, he embodied qualities that had once made him a Delta Force leader: patience, discipline, and quiet strength. The loss of Rex remained profound, but it became a catalyst for reflection, awareness, and subtle influence. David understood that true power was not in confrontation or aggression, but in presence, observation, and measured action. By responding with composure, he had shifted outcomes, inspired reflection, and ensured accountability without unnecessary conflict as the sun set each day. David walked slowly through the neighborhood, feeling the weight of loss and the quiet satisfaction of having acted rightly. He observed neighbors, children playing, and the gentle stirrings of evening life. His steps were steady, his mind alert, yet at peace. Life had dealt him a deep loss, but it had also provided an opportunity to demonstrate the impact of calm, disciplined presence. He paused at a familiar corner, where Rex had often stopped to sniff the air or greet passing dogs. David knelt briefly, whispering words of remembrance and gratitude. Then he rose, continuing his walk. The neighborhood, unaware of the full depth of the man who moved among them, went on with its evening routine. David moved among it with dignity and purpose, a reminder that extraordinary strength often exists quietly, hidden in ordinary lives. Part 2 of David's story was marked by grief. Careful observation, methodical action, and the subtle exercise of influence. It demonstrated that even in tragedy, patience, discipline, and calm decision-making could guide outcomes, teach lessons, and reveal the depth of character hidden in those who appear ordinary. The stage was now set for the next chapter, where consequences, reflection, human resilience would continue to unfold. The days after the tragedy felt heavy and unrelenting. David moved through the motions of life with a quiet intensity, each step measured, each action purposeful. Grief was present, yet it did not consume him. Instead, it sharpened his focus. He knew that clarity and discipline were needed now more than ever. Rex's absence left a void, but David had learned through his years of service that emotional storms could be navigated with structure and patience. He spent mornings walking the neighborhood alone, observing subtle changes in the world around him. The familiar faces of neighbors now carried a mix of curiosity and sympathy, their eyes searching for a sense of understanding in a man who had always been quiet. David greeted them gently, offering small smiles, letting his presence reassure them more than words could. He understood the importance of human connection, even in subtle, understated ways. One afternoon, he returned home to find a letter slipped under his door. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. It was from a neighbor who had witnessed the incident but had not come forward before, afraid of repercussions. The letter described the morning's events from their perspective, highlighting details David had not seen, the exact position of the officers, the way their hands shook slightly, and the moments of hesitation before they acted. Each word added clarity. Filling gaps and confirming the patterns David had observed, he read the letter slowly, absorbing the nuance, then sat back with a deep exhale. This was the information that would help him construct a complete picture. He began cataloging every account, every piece of evidence, noting discrepancies and consistencies. David's mind worked like a precision instrument, parsing data with a calm intensity, honed from years of high-stakes missions. Each entry in his notebook was deliberate, each observation carefully phrased. Evenings were quieter. He would sit on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, thinking of Rex and the routine walks that had brought them both comfort. Sometimes he whispered to the empty space beside him, recalling the dog's playful nudges and the soft patting of paws across the hardwood floors. Memory became both solace and motivation. Every recollection reminded him why he must act carefully, why the response to this tragedy required intelligence, not impulse. David also reached out to the retired colleague who had called him before. Their conversations were long and thoughtful, often stretching late into the night. They spoke of tactics, not in the sense of combat, but in the sense of strategy and timing. How to gather information, how to approach authority figures, and how to maintain control in tense interactions. David listened, analyzed, and applied these insights with methodical precision, translating the lessons of war into the language of civilian life and justice. Word about the incident began to spread. Social media posts, whispers between neighbors, and even local news reports started to circulate. Some mischaracterized what had happened. Others sympathized with the officer's fear, but overlooked the tragedy of Rex's death. David paid little attention to the noise. He did not speak publicly, did not make statements. Instead, he focused on facts, on documentation, and on building a narrative rooted in truth. Several days later, he was invited to meet with the police department's internal review team. The meeting was tense, the kind of quiet anxiety that David had seen countless times in his past life. Though now, it manifested differently. Officers and supervisors were cautious, some defensive, others uncertain how to respond. David entered the room calmly, carrying his notebook and documentation. His presence alone shifted the energy. He did not raise his voice, did not make demands. Yet authority emanated from him naturally. He began by recounting the events objectively, detailing timelines, movements, and interactions. Each point was supported by evidence, video footage, witness statements, and meticulous notes. The room grew quiet as officers and supervisors listened, the weight of accuracy and truth filling the space. David did not accuse. He presented. He focused on clarity and accountability, leaving emotions to be felt internally rather than expressed as aggression. As he spoke, he observed carefully. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Others glanced at each other in silent acknowledgement. David noticed subtle cues, hesitation in speech, minor fidgets, eyes that darted away. Each told a story about human behavior under stress. He remained aware of these signals, using them to guide his explanations, ensuring that his words were understood without inflaming fear or defensiveness. By the end of the meeting, the internal review team had a clear understanding of the incident. The officers involved would face retraining and counseling. Procedural oversights were identified, and recommendations for improved situational awareness were documented. David left the room without fanfare, knowing that the seeds of accountability had been planted. Back home, he reflected on the meeting. It was a quiet victory, though no celebratory feelings accompanied it. The weight of loss remained. But the knowledge that his approach had prevented further mistakes brought a sense of quiet satisfaction. He knew that control, patience, and discipline were more powerful than confrontation. The officers would learn from this. The community would benefit from heightened awareness. Over the next weeks, David continued his routine. He documented every detail he could, spoke quietly with neighbors willing to share their experiences, and observed the environment with precision. Small moments became a source of insight, the way a child crossed the street, how dogs interacted in the park, the subtle changes in traffic patterns. Each observation contributed to a deeper understanding of human behavior and potential risk. Much like the situational awareness he had relied upon in military operations, one afternoon, he received a call from a journalist who had heard whispers about the incident. They asked for an interview. David declined politely, emphasizing that his priority was accuracy, not media attention. He understood the power of narrative and the potential for misrepresentation. The story would be told correctly, but only through careful documentation and evidence, not sensationalism. his interactions with neighbors evolved naturally. Some sought guidance, asking how to handle stressful situations or how to maintain composure under pressure. David shared insights through example rather than instruction, demonstrating calmness, attentiveness, and deliberate action. His presence became a subtle lesson in resilience, showing that even ordinary appearances can conceal extraordinary capability. In quiet moments, he would visit the small park where Rex had enjoyed the afternoons. He sat on a bench, watching other dogs play and children run. Memories of Rex's companionship were vivid, but they no longer carried the sharp edge of grief. Instead, they became reminders of loyalty, trust, and the quiet joy that comes from shared routines. These reflections strengthened his resolve to act with integrity and patience in all matters. David also began to notice the broader implications of the incident. It was not just about Rex or the officers involved. It was about awareness, judgment, and the consequences of rapid decision-making under stress. He considered how fear could distort perception, how assumptions could lead to tragedy, and how calm, informed intervention could prevent mistakes. These thoughts he recorded in his notebook, weaving lessons into reflections on human nature and responsibility. One evening, he received a message from the retired colleague. It was short: "You are handling this as you always have. Remember, restraint is a strength, and presence is influence." David smiled, understanding the depth of the statement. Influence did not always require action or force. Often, it came from being composed, attentive, and deliberate. He had learned this in life-threatening situations, and now he applied it in everyday circumstances. As the community continued its routine, David remained an observer and participant in equal measure. He interacted with neighbors, helped with small tasks when needed, and maintained his quiet routines. His life had returned to a rhythm, though underscored by the lessons of the incident. He knew that vigilance and preparation were as relevant in civilian life as they had been in military operations. Weeks turned into months. The internal review concluded, officers underwent retraining, and neighborhood discussions reflected a newfound awareness. David continued his documentation, quietly noting improvements and remaining vigilant for potential misunderstandings in the future. His approach emphasized clarity, evidence, and measured response, demonstrating that discipline and control could shape outcomes more effectively than emotion or aggression. Through it all, he maintained a sense of balance. Mornings were spent observing the neighborhood, evenings in reflection and documentation. He spoke to neighbors, offered quiet guidance, and modeled calm decision-making. Each day was a deliberate step in processing grief, ensuring accountability. In maintaining personal discipline, David's story began to spread, not through media sensationalism, but through the subtle influence of example. People who observed his composure and careful actions began to reflect on their own behavior. Some became more patient with neighbors, more attentive in tense situations, and more aware of the consequences of fear-driven decisions. His quiet presence became a catalyst for positive change, proving that extraordinary impact often comes from ordinary-seeming individuals who act with integrity and focus. On a cool evening, he walked past the coffee shop, noting familiar scents and faces. The barista waved, a small smile exchanged. Children ran past, laughter filling the air. David's steps were steady, his mind clear. Rex's absence was still felt, but the lessons learned from the loss shaped his actions and perspective. He understood that life could be unpredictable, that misjudgment could have tragic consequences, and that calm, deliberate action could restore order and fairness. He paused at the corner park once more, reflecting on the chain of events. The officers had learned the community had grown more aware, and David had acted with discipline and restraint. The world continued, unaware of the quiet power that had influenced change. David smiled faintly, understanding that his life, while ordinary in appearance, carried the weight and skill of someone who had faced far greater challenges and had emerged guided by principles rather than impulse. Part 3 of David's story emphasized resilience, careful observation, and the subtle power of influence through composure and intelligence. It highlighted how discipline, patience, and deliberate action could navigate grief, ensure accountability, and inspire reflection. As the days moved forward, David's life continued, a quiet testament to the strength hidden in ordinary appearances, and the impact one person could have when acting with clarity, restraint, and unwavering focus. The weeks that followed became a delicate balance between routine and reflection. David moved through each day with purpose, yet he remained aware of the subtleties around him. The neighborhood had grown quieter in some ways, but there were ripples of curiosity in others. Neighbors whispered softly to each other, glancing toward his house as if hoping to catch a glimpse of the man who had endured such a tragedy with remarkable composure. David knew they were watching, not out of malice, but from a human desire to understand. Each morning, he walked the familiar streets, noting the smallest changes, a mailbox slightly ajar, the scent of fresh bread from the bakery, a cat slinking along a fence. These details grounded him, providing stability amidst lingering grief. The absence of Rex was always present, felt in the soft echoes of paws on the hardwood floor, in the empty corner of the porch where the dog used to rest. Yet David did not allow sorrow to dominate. Instead, he transformed it into clarity and focus. His documentation grew more precise. Every witness statement, every neighbor observation, and every minute detail from the day of the incident was carefully organized. David worked as if he were constructing a map of events, tracing paths, movements, and decisions. He understood the importance of accuracy. The tragedy had been preventable, and now he would ensure that the lessons learned were undeniable. Leaving no room for oversight, the police department finally contacted him to schedule a follow-up meeting. This time, the tone was different. There was a mix of caution, curiosity, and respect. David prepared meticulously. He reviewed all his notes, rehearsed how to present his findings clearly, and anticipated questions they might ask. His goal was not to intimidate, though he knew his presence alone carried weight. His aim was accountability, understanding, and the hope that the officers involved would learn from their errors. On the day of the meeting, David arrived early. He carried only his notebook, his demeanor calm and steady. Inside the room, several officers and supervisors waited. Some faces betrayed discomfort, others curiosity, but all watched him closely. He greeted each of them with a simple nod, setting a tone of respect and seriousness. David began by outlining the timeline of events. Each moment was described factually, without embellishment or emotional coloring. He spoke slowly, deliberately, allowing the information to sink in. He highlighted areas where judgment had faltered, where assumptions had been made too quickly, and where awareness could have prevented tragedy. The officers listened, many shifting in their seats, realizing for the first time the weight of what had occurred. As the meeting progressed, some officers began to ask questions. They inquired about his observations, about the behavior of Rex, and about how he had maintained composure in the face of loss. David responded with clarity, drawing on his experiences, yet carefully avoiding unnecessary detail about his past. The focus remained on the incident, the consequences, the lessons to be learned. At one point, an officer spoke hesitantly. We didn't realize how serious the situation was. We thought the dog was going to attack." David nodded, acknowledging their fear without condoning the action. "Fear can cloud judgment," he said softly, "but responsibility remains. Understanding and control are essential in moments like these." His tone was firm yet measured. It carried authority, not from intimidation, but from certainty and experience. By the end of the session, the department had a clear understanding of what had occurred and why. Recommendations were drafted for retraining, improved situational awareness, and protocols to ensure that future encounters were handled with more care. David left the building quietly, without fanfare. His role completed not through force, but through clarity, patience, and deliberate action. Back at home, he sat on his porch and let the evening breeze wash over him. The neighborhood was settling into its quiet rhythm, children finishing their homework, couples walking dogs along familiar routes, the occasional car passing softly. David reflected on the day, on the power of calm intervention. and on the subtle influence one person could have when acting deliberately and responsibly. In the following days, he continued to observe the neighborhood, noting shifts in behavior. Officers appeared more cautious during routine patrols, neighbors engaged more thoughtfully with each other, and small acts of courtesy began to ripple subtly through the community. David understood that change was gradual, often invisible at first, persistent and impactful over time. His evenings remained moments of reflection. He would sit with a cup of coffee, thinking of Rex, recalling the moments of companionship and joy. These memories no longer brought only grief. They reminded him of loyalty, trust, and the deep bond that had defined their years together. In those quiet moments, he also planned for the future. Considering how to continue fostering understanding and awareness without intrusion or conflict, one afternoon, a neighbor approached him cautiously. "I just wanted to say, thank you," they began, "for how you handled everything. I don't know if I could have stayed so calm." David smiled faintly, nodding. "It's not easy," he replied. "But sometimes, staying calm is the only way to ensure things don't get worse. Every decision matters, and every moment counts." The neighbors seemed to understand, and they left with a quiet sense of reassurance. The months continued, marked by routine and subtle vigilance. David maintained his careful observations, his documentation, and his quiet presence in the neighborhood. He continued to attend meetings when required, offering insight and perspective, always focused on clarity, responsibility, and improvement rather than blame or retaliation. His approach created respect not only for his expertise but for his unwavering commitment to principle and fairness. In private, David also explored ways to honor Rex. He planted a small tree in the backyard, a living memory that would grow and provide shade and beauty over time. The tree became a symbol not just of loss, but of resilience, of continuity, and of the quiet strength that comes from enduring hardship with integrity. Each morning, he would water the tree, a small ritual of remembrance and reflection. As the neighborhood grew accustomed to the aftermath of the incident, David began to engage in small, deliberate ways with the community. He assisted neighbors with practical tasks, offered advice in emergencies, and shared quiet encouragement when needed. His presence became a stabilizing force, a reminder that strength could manifest in patience, calm, and thoughtful action rather than aggression or confrontation. David also found moments of personal growth. He revisited old journals, reflecting on lessons from his past and connecting them with the events of the present. He considered the patterns of human behavior, effects of fear and misunderstanding, and the importance of preparation, awareness, and discipline. These reflections were written down meticulously, forming a compendium of insight that would guide him in both ordinary and extraordinary circumstances. Occasionally, he received calls or messages from individuals who had heard of the incident. They asked questions, sought advice, or simply wished to understand how one could maintain composure in such a stressful situation. David responded with measured thought, emphasizing observation, preparation, and the value of patience. He encouraged them to consider consequences, to analyze situations calmly, and to act with intention rather than impulse. The community began to shift subtly. Officers approached encounters with more awareness. Neighbors engaged in more deliberate communication, and small conflicts were resolved without escalation. David recognized these changes not as personal accolades, but as evidence that thoughtful, composed action could ripple outward, influencing others and creating meaningful outcomes. In the quiet of his home, he often reflected on what he had learned from both Rex and the incident. Loss, he realized, carried lessons not only about grief, but about responsibility, awareness, and the weight of every decision. He understood that strength was not always visible, that influence could be exerted through calm example, and that patience and discipline often yielded results far more enduring than immediate reaction. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, David walked slowly through the neighborhood. The air was cool, carrying faint smells of evening meals and freshly cut grass. Children laughed in the distance. Neighbors called out greetings, and life moved forward with gentle persistence. David paused briefly, feeling the subtle pulse of community and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that his actions had contributed to a safer, more aware environment. The months passed, each day blending into the next with routine and purpose. David continued to maintain his balance, observing, reflecting, and acting when necessary. His life remained simple in appearance, yet rich with insight, discipline, and the subtle power of influence. The lessons of patience, accountability, and measured action became a quiet, guiding force. Not only for him, but for those who encountered him or learned from the aftermath of the incident. In private moments, he would smile faintly at memories of Rex. Remembering the joy and companionship that had defined so many mornings, he would tend to the tree in the backyard, a living reminder of loyalty, love, and resilience. And he would prepare mentally and emotionally for whatever challenges might come next, confident that calm, deliberate action and thoughtful observation would always guide him through the complexities of life. Part 4 of David's story emphasizes the ripple effect of composed action, the importance of reflection, and the quiet power of human influence. It shows that true strength is not always visible, that responsibility and patience can shape outcomes, and that, even in the face of tragedy, one person's careful and deliberate actions can inspire understanding, growth, and lasting change. The weeks turned into months, and David's life settled into a rhythm that was both familiar and new. The pain of losing Rex never fully disappeared, but it transformed from a sharp ache into a quiet companion, a reminder of loyalty and love. Each morning he rose with purpose, aware of the day's potential, yet unburdened by fear. His walks through the neighborhood remained a ritual, each step a meditation, each observation a way to connect with the world around him. One morning, as he passed the corner bakery, the scent of fresh bread mingling with the crisp autumn air, David noticed a small crowd gathered near the park. Curious, he approached slowly, observing from a distance. Children had gathered around an elderly man, listening intently as he told stories of his youth. David watched quietly, appreciating the subtle way communities built connections. How shared stories could bridge gaps between strangers. He realized that life, even in its ordinary moments, contained lessons in patience, empathy, and understanding. After watching for a while, continued his walk, his mind turning to the changes in the neighborhood over the past months. He had witnessed officers adjusting their approaches, neighbors growing more considerate, and small conflicts being resolved calmly. The transformation had been subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was real. David understood that influence often worked in quiet ways, through example rather than force. One calm, deliberate presence could ripple outward, shaping the behavior of others without them even realizing it. Back home, he settled into his usual routine. Mornings were for reflection and preparation. Afternoons often included practical tasks, repairing a fence for a neighbor, helping carry groceries for an elderly couple, or simply checking in with someone who needed reassurance. Even small actions held meaning. David understood that significance didn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it was the quiet consistency of being present that mattered most. In the evenings, he returned to the backyard, where the tree he had planted for Rex had grown taller. He watered it carefully, observing its leaves glisten with droplets of water. It had become more than a memorial. It was a symbol of resilience, of life continuing in spite of loss. Sometimes he would sit under its branches, reflecting on his journey, the lessons learned, and the growth that had come from hardship. He found solace in these moments, a sense of connection to something larger than himself, a reminder that life moved forward, even when grief lingered. One day, a young woman from the neighborhood approached him while he was tending to the tree. She introduced herself and explained that she'd been struggling with fear and anxiety after hearing about the incident with Rex. She asked for guidance, unsure how to manage her emotions or respond to situations that felt threatening. David listened patiently, offering calm, thoughtful advice. He emphasized observation, awareness, and the importance of maintaining composure. Fear is natural, he said softly, but it doesn't have to control you. How you respond matters more than what you feel in the moment. they spoke for some time, and David found himself reflecting on the unexpected ways his experiences could help others. His past, filled with danger and discipline, had prepared him to act under pressure. But it also equipped him with insight into human behavior, into fear, and into resilience. He realized that sharing this knowledge, even in small doses, could have a profound impact. When she left, he felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that guidance offered with empathy could create ripples of understanding. The days continued with this balance of routine and engagement. David remained vigilant, not because he anticipated danger, but because he recognized the value of awareness. He trained physically, keeping his body strong and capable, yet never flaunted his skills. His focus was on preparedness, not demonstration. He knew that true strength often went unnoticed, quietly supporting life's demands and protecting those who might not recognize the need for vigilance. One afternoon, while walking through the neighborhood, David encountered a minor accident. A bicycle had collided with a low fence, leaving the rider shaken but unharmed. He approached calmly, assessing the situation before intervening. Softly, he guided the child and their parent through the steps needed to ensure safety. Checking for injuries and calming fears, the mother expressed gratitude, remarking on his composure and the ease with which he handled the situation. David only nodded, aware that patience and observation were more powerful than panic or force. As the months wore on, David noticed more subtle transformations in the community. Children played with greater confidence, neighbors spoke more openly with each other, and minor disputes were resolved through conversation rather than anger. He recognized these changes as the outcome of countless small interactions, a network of influence that grew stronger with every act of calm, deliberate attention. The community was learning, adapting, and evolving in ways that were both subtle and profound. David's reflections deepened. He spent time considering the patterns of human behavior he had observed, the ways fear and misunderstanding could lead to tragedy, and the methods through which clarity and patience could prevent harm. He revisited his journals, documenting insights, and recording strategies for maintaining composure in high-pressure scenarios. His writings became a private compendium, a guide to understanding both human nature and the impact of thoughtful action. Occasionally, he received messages from people outside the neighborhood, individuals who had heard about the incident and sought advice on maintaining composure and awareness. He responded carefully, emphasizing the importance of preparation, observation, and deliberate decision-making. His words were practical, grounded in experience, and intended to empower rather than intimidate. He found purpose in sharing insight, realizing that lessons learned from hardship could be a gift when offered with patience and humility. Winter arrived, and the neighborhood transformed under a blanket of snow. David watched the world change, appreciating the stillness and quiet that the season brought. He cleared paths for neighbors, checked in on those who were isolated, and maintained his own routines. Each act, though small, contributed to a sense of order and care, reinforcing the bonds that held the community together. The tree in his backyard, now bare of leaves, stood as a silent testament to endurance, reminding him of both loss and resilience. One cold evening, David sat by his fireplace, reflecting on the year that had passed since Rex's death. He thought of the grief, the meetings, the subtle transformations in the neighborhood, and the countless moments of quiet intervention. He understood that life was a continuous series of choices, each carrying consequences that could ripple outward, influencing events and people in ways both visible and unseen. His own journey, marked by discipline, reflection, and resilience, had become intertwined with the lives of those around him in ways he had not anticipated. Spring returned, bringing renewal and growth. The tree for Rex sprouted new leaves, and flowers began to bloom across the neighborhood. David observed these changes with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that life continued, resilient and adaptive. He continued his walks, noticing patterns, engaging subtly with neighbors, and maintaining the balance between vigilance and peace. His life had become a testament to the power of calm, deliberate action, and the quiet influence one person could have on a broader community. One afternoon, a minor emergency occurred. A small fire broke out in a neighbor's garage. David was the first to arrive, assessing the situation before alerting the fire department. He guided residents to safety, ensuring that no one was harmed while the professionals contained the blaze. The response was calm and methodical, relying on observation, planning, and clear communication. When the fire was extinguished, neighbors expressed gratitude and admiration for his composure. David only nodded, recognizing that preparation and calm action were often more effective than heroics or panic. Over time, he developed a subtle mentorship role within the community. Younger residents sought his advice on handling stress, remaining aware of their surroundings and maintaining control in tense situations. David shared strategies without imposing, guiding others to find strength within themselves. He emphasized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. And that influence often arose from patience, consistency, and measured action. David also explored creative outlets. He began painting, using simple colors to capture the world around him. His work reflected the calm and clarity he valued, each brushstroke deliberate, each scene a quiet observation of life. Painting became another form of reflection, allowing him to process experiences, commemorate memories, and express insights without words. His art was private, yet it served as a reminder of the beauty and subtlety present in everyday life. Through all these activities, David maintained his core principles: observation, patience, and thoughtful action. He understood that influence and leadership did not always require public recognition. True impact often existed quietly, shaping events, guiding behavior, fostering understanding in ways that were imperceptible at first, but profound over time. His life became a model of deliberate, purposeful living, demonstrating that calm, consistent action could create lasting change. One evening, as he walked through the neighborhood under the soft glow of streetlights, David noticed the subtle ways in which the community had grown. Children played freely, neighbors spoke openly, and minor challenges were met with cooperation rather than conflict. He felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing that his presence, guidance, and consistent actions had contributed to this environment. The neighborhood had evolved, not through force or authority, but through patience, understanding, and the quiet influence of example. Reflecting on the past year, David realized that grief, loss, and challenges had provided profound lessons. He had learned that patience and composure were powerful tools, that observation and preparation could prevent harm, and that influence often spread quietly, through example rather than demand. His life, marked by discipline and reflection, had become intertwined with the well-being of others, creating ripples of understanding, empathy, and resilience. The seasons continued to change, and David remained a steady presence. He tended the tree in his backyard, continued his walks, and engaged subtly with the community. He reflected, wrote, painted, and mentored, finding purpose in both ordinary and extraordinary moments. His life, while outwardly simple, carried depth, insight, and the quiet power of deliberate action. Eventually, David understood that his journey was not defined solely by past experiences or tragedy, but by the choices he made each day. The calm, composed, and deliberate approach he cultivated shaped not only his life, but the lives of those around him. Through quiet observation, thoughtful engagement, and consistent action, he had created a lasting legacy of resilience, awareness, and empathy. David's story concluded not with fanfare or dramatic events, but with the subtle affirmation that one person's presence could influence the course of a community. Through patience, reflection, and deliberate action, he demonstrated that strength lay not in aggression or dominance, but in composure, understanding, and the steady application of principle. Life continued, enriched by his quiet influence, and the lessons of loyalty, resilience, and thoughtful action endured, shaping the world in small but meaningful ways. As the sun set over the neighborhood, casting a warm golden light across rooftops and gardens, David paused. breathing deeply and feeling a profound sense of peace. The tree he had planted for Rex glimmered in the fading light. Children's laughter echoed softly, and the community moved forward with newfound awareness. David smiled faintly, knowing that life's true impact often existed in the quiet moments, in the subtle actions that shaped not only the present but the future. In that moment, he understood that his journey, marked by loss, reflection, and deliberate action, had created ripples that would endure far beyond his own life. A testament to the power of calm, observation, and unwavering principle.